When I was younger, my parents would take us to my grandparents' house on my mom's side. My mom is from a large family, and it's worth noting that she has 11 siblings, and they almost all have 5 or more kids. When we add everyone up, the gatherings consisted of roughly 60 first cousins, a handful of second cousins, aunts, uncles, immediate family, and of course, my grandparents. Now, one of my favorite holidays to attend was Easter. We'd go to my grandma and grandpa's house, and immediately stepping into the old house, we would be filled with warmth from the hot ovens and from the mass of people, along with the overwhelming but incredible scent of ham and potatoes cooking and pickles sitting out. We'd go to eat, we'd talk and play with one another, and then, after being filled with warmth from the food and the company, many of us would lay down to take a nap. When we awoke, we'd be filled with the excitement again as we carefully chose whether we should go back for more food or start playing outside in the fresh springtime warmth. Now, I can't tell this story without noting that my grandma and grandpa did an egg hunt almost every year. And I know that when most people think of an egg hunt, they think of someone hiding eggs all over the place and each child gets a handful of goodies. But not with my grandparents. Since there were so many of us, we each got one single egg. And in order to tell our eggs apart, each child's egg was labeled carefully with their name on a tiny piece of paper. When we'd finally gather for the egg hunt, my grandparents would hide the younger kids' eggs in easier spots for them to find, and the older kids' eggs in harder spots. Now, this blows me away just thinking about how much time and energy they took, not only in writing each of our names down on that tiny piece of paper and filling an egg with jelly beans and malted milk balls for each of us, but also that they knew each of us personally by age and hid the eggs accordingly. Now, one Easter, I told them that I was always amazed that they could remember all of us like that. And they told me that they started every morning of their day in their living room by praying for each of us, facing in the direction that we all lived. They would say each of our names out loud as if they were calling to let us know that God was with us and that we are known by them. Now, I'm not going to pretend like my grandparents were Jesus in this story. For one, they were not night owls. They'd go to bed early and they'd wake up early, getting a jump start on the day. And in our passage that we talk about today, Jesus is staying up all night long praying. It's the one place in the Gospel of Luke where he stays up all night praying before making a big decision. Which makes me wonder, how do we spend our time before making big decisions? I don't know about you, but if I have a big day coming up, I don't usually think to myself, I think I'll stay up all night so that I'm not as good at functioning tomorrow. No, I try to rest. My grandparents were also some of the most faith-filled people that I knew growing up. It seemed like nothing could shake them and that they were always so confident in their relationship with God. And yet, they still prayed every time that they had a free moment. Which brings me to our message. If you think about the Bible, who is the most faith-filled person in there? Probably Jesus. He was the most connected person to God, and yet he prayed. And I imagine that he could have asked God to just send him a list of names for disciples and left it at that, but he wanted to take time to grow and talk to God. Listen to God, communicate his feelings with God. And in response, I'm willing to bet that God was also listening and communicating with Jesus. And I can't help but wonder what a beautiful moment that must have been for them, and what a wonderful reminder this is for us, that no matter how connected we might feel with God, there is always room to pray and have it be a two-way relationship. God listens, we listen. Jesus took calling these apostles very seriously. This was a big decision for him. He was going to spend every moment of the coming years with them, and he knew that. He needed people that he could get along with and trust. But then I kept reading, and it says that he also chose Judas by name. Now, I almost always forget that there were 2 Judases that Jesus calls to be an apostle. Did Jesus know that he was going to get betrayed by Judas Iscariot before calling him to be an apostle? Maybe. But did he still call him? Yes. Which means that Jesus knew that pain was a part of life. Now, I'm sure that he knew that all of his apostles would question him or cause him some kind of struggle at some point, but he still called them by name and he still loved them. Jesus had even called people again who had already been called. And in a similar sense, Jesus calls us by name. We mess up, we stumble in faith, and God is still there calling our name again and again. God has an open hand to us, saying, "Be my hands and feet," and then help others. I had the opportunity to lead men's Bible study last Thursday morning, and one of the attendees brought up baptism with this story. Now, I was a little surprised, but it helped me think deeper about these verses. I mean, Jesus calls us through baptism to walk alongside God in everyday lives, and in this, we make the same promises to one another. We come together in a moment of faith, and what a beautiful gift that is from God. Now, I can't talk about this Bible passage without also flipping the script a little and reading between the lines. I mean, here's Jesus praying before making this huge decision, but Jesus isn't the only one involved here. The apostles also had to make this decision to follow Jesus. And if I'm being completely honest, I'm curious what they were up to through this. I mean, sure, it would be easy to just look at it from Jesus's viewpoint, and we should pray and connect with God before making a big decision. That in itself is a great message. But what happens if we don't pray or connect with God before making a major decision? I doubt the apostles knew what was about to hit them in a larger sense. But I do have a little doubt that they didn't have an idea of what might happen if they set their lives aside and followed Jesus. Did they also spend the night in prayer? Did they know that Jesus was going to pick them? Were they eagerly awaiting to find out if they made the list to be on Christ's team, the way that people in sports or theater do? What was going through their minds throughout this? Were any of them completely clueless and just twiddling their thumbs throughout it? Was God talking to them in this moment? And was the Holy Spirit moving through them? On those Easter mornings, as my grandparents worked hard to finish hiding our eggs, I'm filled with memories of running around and being carefree and giggling in the midst of the chaos. We were pausing and taking the time that we needed, however we needed it. And no, we might not have had a big decision to make, but in those moments, little did I know or realize that my grandparents were setting an example for us, that they were teaching us about faith without us knowing. They were setting the stage for us as we continued to grow with God down the road, and at the same time, they knew what we needed in those moments, and were able to take the time to grow in relationship and be in the moment of our everyday lives. Now, you probably know where I'm going with this, and we can't talk about these verses without asking that hard question. Who do you identify with most in this story? Are you more like Jesus, praying and connecting with God before making a big decision? Are you more like the apostles, potentially growing in community with one another and being in the moment? Or are you somewhere in the middle, only talking to God when it's a huge decision regarding something spiritual? I'm not here to preach one or the other necessarily. I think that there's beauty in both. Which leads me to self-care. As we continue talking about how Jesus took naps in our sermon series, this reminds me that Jesus was human. Pulling an all-nighter meant that he was probably somewhat stressed, and this was where he found comfort and clarity. Jesus was talking to God to help provide the answers. Maybe Jesus was a verbal processor and needed to talk out his thoughts before making the decision or realizing what needed to be done. Maybe he was simply just listening to God and what God had to say and was meditating in his journey thus far, dreaming about what was to come. So my question for you is, how do you connect with God throughout big decisions? How do you connect with God when making decisions, period? Do you research? Do you talk to experts? Do you process with those around you? Who do you talk to about it? And does prayer play a part in your life and your relationship with God? Now, if you're unsure about any of these questions, I encourage you not to feel discouraged about this. I think this is a great time, instead of focusing on Jesus in this story, to instead look at the apostles. They clearly didn't have all the answers, and we see this numerous times throughout the Bible. They had to start somewhere, and that somewhere began with Jesus calling them by name to follow him. Jesus even called the one who he knew would eventually betray him. Sometimes there's pain in relationships. Sometimes people mess up. We even mess up and are the ones that cause pain often. But Jesus is still there calling us by name, saying, "Follow me. I will teach you even when you mess up. I'll be there to sit with you in the midst of the chaos. I will heal you when you need it. I'll be there in the struggles, in the joy. I'll be there when you need to take time to yourself and stay up all night and think through a difficult decision or time. I'll be there as you learn to be a friend when you feel lonely, and I will call you by name for who you are and for whose you are."